Welcome back to Cowboys Not Eggheads. Today I'm very, very pleased to have Mark Langan on the podcast, and shout out to Janie Peterson, who's our mutual friend, and she's been on here. They're great. Roger and Janie Peterson, they're just great people.
They're great, and I appreciate the referral a lot.
So Mark Langan, to let my listeners know about who Mark's all about, is he's retired after a 26-year career with the Omaha Police Department. In 1978, Mark was the youngest police officer ever hired at the Omaha Police Department at age 18, which is an incredible statement. He worked as a uniform officer and as a detective in the burglary, vice, and narcotics units. Mark was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 1988, working as a supervisor in the narcotics unit until his retirement in 2004. He has appeared on national news programs, including the Nancy Grace Show, CNN, and the Today Show. And today we're on Cowboys Not Eggheads, so you've really made it, buddy. And so you're also the author of a couple books, Busting Bad Guys, and then the next one is called Busting More Bad Guys. Is that right?
More busting bad guys.
More busting.
So, bad guys and more busting bad guys.
So really good stuff. I have not read your books. I've done some research and looked at some of the stories. So we're going to start with stories right away, because people like stories as being a cop.
And I've not been prompted here, so this is all off the cuff.
Here we go.
Audience.
So tell us about the Benson woman who was hidden in a room.
Yeah, so that's people's favorite story. When I do book signings and people will come up to the table and they'll say, love the book, and this is my favorite story from the book. So this is probably in the mid-90s. We were after this drug dealer in Benson for years. He was very, very good at what he did in regards to keeping us from arresting him, but we knew he had a center of activity based in his house in Benson, and we finally were able to serve a search warrant there on a cold winter day, snowy out and everything, and we took the SWAT team because we knew he probably had weapons, which he did. We found several semi-automatic rifles and some dangerous weapons. We bashed the door in, rushed in. We found him down the basement with a drug customer, and it was just an amazing scene in the basement because he had cameras on the wall, monitors, and this is the mid-90s where not a lot of people had this stuff back then, and he actually had microphones outside the house hooked into speakers downstairs, so you could actually hear us coming up to the house, which was a disadvantage for us. Cameras all around the house and everything. Just, he was very, very paranoid, probably from all the meth use that he had done over the years. So we had more than enough to arrest him.
What kind of resistance did he show?
No, he didn't show any. Okay. No, when we came downstairs, he was already prone out on the floor. I think he knew he was pretty well had.
Like those guys.
Well, the SWAT team threw a stun grenade down the steps, and it sounds like a hand grenade going off. Yeah. So that's a very intimidating way to enter a house. It normally works, yes. And so we cuffed him up. We're searching the house. And about 20 or 30 minutes into the search, I see one of my guys looking at a dresser along the basement wall. And it was a wood paneled wall. Back in those days, a lot of dark wood paneling on walls and everything. And he was kind of running his hand above the dresser, 4 or 5 foot dresser. And I said, what's going on? And he said, I think there's a door here. So we pulled the dresser back, and sure as heck, there was like a hidden door up along the wall. And we opened the door, and we were shocked to find this female in her 20s, looked like a skeleton. I mean, she obviously was a meth head for a long time. And she was living in this room on a mattress, and she had her meth pipe and a little bit of meth in there and a mason jar full of urine. And I thought, well, this is really strange. We normally don't see this. And me as the sergeant, I was not at all happy that we missed somebody on the sweep of the house. Kind of the cardinal rule is you don't want to miss a suspect, because that suspect could be armed and could pose danger. So, but come to find out, here's the story. So this guy was married, and he had a wife and kids, and the wife worked during the day, and the gal in the bedroom was his kind of girlfriend /
meth
mistress. Yeah, pretty good. At night, when the wife was home, got home from work and everything, he'd hide the gal in this hidden room, and then when she'd go to work during the day, he'd bring her out, except for when there was a customer. He'd always sneak her in there because he didn't want her to see the drug deals taking place. That's why she was in the room, because there was a customer there also. So he was telling us this, and she was kind of admitting it too. Well, then the wife came home after we had hit the house. And I went upstairs. Oh,
Listeners,
you know what's
we're going
coming.
to talk a little bit later about humor and police work.
You know what's coming. So I went upstairs and she was shocked, obviously. And the three little girls were just cute little things sitting there scared to death. We try to be as nice as we can be to them, but it's still very intimidating. And I told her, I said, you need to come downstairs and see what I found. And I brought her downstairs and she saw her husband and with that look of agony on her face. And she turned and saw this meth head mistress, and the look on her face switched to a homicidal stare to both her, the girl, and her husband. And she said, "Who is this?" to her husband. And he said, "We'll talk about it later." And I quickly ushered her upstairs because I was really scared she was trying to kill the guy.
Yeah.
And so that's the story of the hidden room in the basement with the mistress. And I've given hundreds of talks to different groups since my book came out. And I always like to end that portion of my talk by saying, I know a lot of the women in the crowd are going to go home tonight and check for hidden rooms, and just to make sure.
That's what happens when you're on meth. You do those types of things.
That doesn't happen every day. The hidden room trick doesn't happen every day.
So what kind of mental state was this mistress in? Just
bad.
B-A-D bad.
Yes, yeah. She was smoking meth during the day.
Did she know that you were a police officer?
She was at least that lucid, I suppose. But she was not, she knew what was going on, but her whole life revolved around smoking meth in that room and then coming out when he let her come out. And she wasn't being held captive. I get that question a lot. Was she being held against her will? Was she being held captive? And the answer is no. She was willingly there.
So this guy didn't get prosecuted and write him up for kidnapping
no.
What's the other, whatever. But
yeah. he did go to prison for a substantial amount of time.
Yeah.
I think you're thinking of false imprisonment. Right. Thing like that.
I needed to go get my green statute book and look it up.
Yeah, but nothing like that. But he did serve a substantial amount of time, and that's the favorite story out of that first book, no doubt.
Unbelievable. I mean, and that's right here in Omaha, Nebraska. I mean, I don't think you saw a lot of the dark side.
I did.
And I don't, you can't handle the truth as a real thing. And being on the dark side, it's how did you balance that out when you went home, when you went back to your real life? Yeah,
so I was good at compartmentalizing the job away from my personal life. It's difficult to do, but if you ask both of my kids now, and they're one's in her early 40s, the other, the boy will be 40 in August, they would tell you that they knew that Dad had a pretty cool job when they were in grade school and high school, but they really had no scope or no idea as to what I was involved in, what I was doing.
And so how did you handle that, Mark? I mean, that's kind of where the blue line comes in, because if you've got something on your mind, you didn't really share it with your family. Did you share it with your wife? How did you cope? I mean, because you do see a lot of things that most people don't see. Maybe you saw. I never saw an accident fatality, for instance, but I did. I mean, as a reserve officer, I did see some things. One was, we did a lot of welfare checks, for instance, or when somebody was moving out, and we civil standby and all those things. And one of the most crushing things I ever saw was a similar situation where little kids were involved in this very chaotic, messy situation. And as I recall, I think the mother was saying, "See, kids, this is what cops do. This is what pigs do. They break up families." And this little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 or 8 years old, just looked up at me, and she was shaking, quivering, and she urinated on the floor. Now, that is not something you can just go home and just dismiss.
Yeah, I had a very similar story that's mentioned in book number 1, where we did a SWAT team search warrant again, and those are very dynamic entries, and I tried not to do those if kids were present, but in this situation, we didn't know that this little girl, probably about the same age, was going to be there, and her mom was allowing California gang members to hide drugs in their apartment, and this is probably back in the early 90s. And after we got situated, this little girl came up and grabbed my leg and hugged it and said, "Please don't let anybody hurt me." And I can still see her looking up at me like that. And that made the book. And that was kind of a cathartic experience for me to write about that story. So the way I would compartmentalize is I'd go home every night and make sure my kids were tucked in bed, nice and safe, alarm on, house locked, everybody's safe, and that way I could decompress and maybe stay up till, sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning, because I worked nights my entire career. And another thing I did was I really tried to have friends away from the job. So we have a core group of good friends that we've been friends for well over 30 years. I mean, actually probably close to 40 with one particular group. And we still associate with each other. And they kind of stay away from the cop stories. They know I don't want to talk about it. So I really had a core group of friends outside the department. But I'll tell you, my dearest, closest friends are my friends in blue. And, my old partner, who's now 78 years old, 77 years old, still best friends to this day. And he took me under his wing when I was a brand new officer, and we've been best friends ever since. You never lose those friendships with those guys and gals.
Definitely not. There's a camaraderie that is hard to describe. I suppose people in the military, guys that serve in a tight military unit, would understand it, obviously. But I don't know what the Omaha code was for officer need assistant. I think it's open. I don't know what officer need assistant.
Officer.
It was helping officer. It was 1089 for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew that if I ever called 1089, first of all, I wouldn't do that unless I thought my butt was in trouble right now.
Right.
But I knew that guys were going to drop everything, and they were going to be there as safely and quickly as possible. And there's just something about that particular feeling. And then also responding to an officer needing assistance is like, you just put everything out of your mind, and all you can think about is getting there and making sure this guy goes home at night. And it's hard to describe that feeling, but it's a foxhole type mentality. Now, I was being a reserve officer was not my full-time job. My full-time job was being a political operative for 41 years. Or 31, excuse me, not 41, 31. In political campaigns, you get those kind of tight, us against the world type mentalities also, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same.
Especially working in a city Omaha size, if I needed help, I knew I had probably 20 cruisers within 2 minutes that were going to be racing in to save my butt. And I was going to do the same thing. So, and these are even officers that I don't know personally. And some officers have beefs with other officers. I mean, any job, you're going to have personality conflicts and people not getting along and gossiping and
politics and all of it.
Right, politics. But if somebody hits that microphone and says, help an officer, everybody comes.
And you can tell, too, by guys on the radio, you can tell, I mean, if you listen to the same guys in the radio for years and then there's something off with their voice, you just know. You're like, you're out. So it's an unbelievable.
It's a feeling of security for me.
Yes.
Yes. And the reason cops are so close, and you hear the term thin blue line and brothers in blue, and you hear that in a negative tone more these days than you do in a positive tone, especially the thin blue line and the wall of silence and all this kind of stuff, is we as police officers deal with things on a daily basis that most people don't see their entire life.
Tell the truth. I mean, they wouldn't want to see.
And we know that we're not going to be complimented for a great job. We're going to be criticized when we do bad.
Let's face it. Police don't get called when things are going well. Police get called when things are in the absolute worst part of someone's life is when you usually get called.
Chief Schmatter, I've heard him talk a couple times, and I'm a big fan of Chief Schmatter. I think he does a great job. And he'll tell a crowd, he'll say, how reassuring is it to know that if you're having the worst moment of your life, you can call 911 and within a couple minutes you have police officers there, you have fire and rescue there, the help is there if you need it. And he's right. That is a great thing to know that helps that close. Because, like you said, we don't see people on their best day, especially in the drug squad where I was, and I did well over 500 no-knock search warrants in my career. These are, we're definitely not making people's days when we bash that door down. And we always took for granted, let me rephrase that. We never took for granted the fact that they would have weapons, that they would possibly arm themselves and try to use deadly force against us. But we had great training, and I relied on that training. And myself and the officers that served, I hate to say the word under me, but I was a sergeant. They were on my crew.
Sure.
We always took safety very, very safe, very, very safely.
Yeah.
Seriously.
It's very serious business. It really, really is. Yeah. How many times in your law enforcement career, now my answer is 2, but how many times in your law enforcement career did you have a situation where you thought, holy shit, this is it. And the next 10 seconds could determine the fate of my life. My ass is about to get handed to me.
Once.
Just once.
That was February 14, 2002.
And that was a force incident.
Yes. Myself and another officer shot and killed a suspect in South Omaha. And I'm not going to at all say that I thought my butt was in a ringer, but...
He points a gun at me.
Well, in that situation, the gun was never pointed at me. We were chasing a guy down a street who bailed from a traffic stop on a drug investigation, and he was able to draw his gun and start firing upon my officer, who dove behind a picket fence. And myself and the other officer still mention the picket fence to this day, that picket fence had like some kind of barrier. Somebody was looking out because, picket fences are not going to stop bullets.
No.
but he was in a bad spot. And both myself and he, the other officer, fired a total of 32 rounds in 13 seconds were fired in that situation. 6 by the suspect and 3 by me. And the other officer fired whatever the math is. He was able to reload his magazine and keep firing. And we shot and killed the suspect in the street. So that's the closest that I ever came to losing somebody who was very dear to me and still is to this day. And, that's a traumatic situation for a lot of people. And
anybody.
People fail to realize that it's traumatic on the officers, too. It's not just traumatic on the suspect's family, but you see very little in the media about how impactful those things are on the police.
So let's talk about that a little bit. That was in 2002, you said?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So I always went through that in my head. What would happen if I ever got in a situation where I was in a situation like that? The first thing I think I would be, I've seen previous interviews with you where you talked about where you yourself were Mirandized. That would piss me off. And I've thought that through. Hey, F you, I just did my job. I would be pissed, which wouldn't be good. And that's why I always talk myself through that scenario. How are you going to handle God forbid, but how would you handle that, Sam, if you were in that position and now all of a sudden people are coming after, I would think give me a little space here. But that probably happened right away, right? Because you debrief pretty quickly.
Yeah, so as soon as the suspect was down and we handcuffed him, and he was obviously dead right away, probably before he hit the ground. And I still ordered him to be handcuffed and searched, just that standard protocol. And within about 2 minutes, the first command officer arrived on the scene of equal rank of myself, sergeant. But I knew, and he knew what he had to do. I knew what he was going to do. And he came up and he said, I'll need who fired shots. And I told him, and he said, I'll need your firearms. And he said, you're going to get transported to Central Station right now for interviews. And so within minutes of that shooting happening, I was in a police cruiser being driven to Central Station, put in a room all by myself, not knowing how my other officers were doing, and probably was there for 3 or 4 hours with very little human contact. It was very difficult.
Without human contact, so they didn't even
sure, they came in every once in a while.
They didn't even interview until 3-4 hours.
Well, they interviewed me the following day because I used my.
Oh, so they put you in a room and for 3 or 4 hours, and they bring you a drink. You okay? And is that standard procedure then? Sure. And so it's basically a cool off, really, right?
I think they're conducting their investigation. They know they have the officers secured in different locations, so we can't rehearse stories. And it was probably 3 or 4 hours. Then we drove to the hospital.
Did your mind play trick on Mark? It would play tricks on you, like, my God, did I do this right? Was this right? Was this justified? I mean, you start asking yourself questions, right?
Yeah, I got home about probably 3 a.m. My wife was waiting up for me, and I laid in bed that night, and I never slept, but I laid in bed, and I remember thinking to myself, he did fire shots at us, didn't he? I mean, honest to God, even though I know for a fact he was pulled a gun and was firing shots at the other officer, my mind was playing tricks on me. It's very. And in the shootout itself, his gun sounded like a cannon. It was a revolver. I think it was a .357 revolver. And when I was shooting, I didn't hear anything. It was like auditory exclusion. I remember thinking, is my gun firing? Because I wasn't hearing my gun go off. All I heard was his cannon going off. And again, this all happened in 13 seconds. So yeah. There's a lot to comprehend in those 13 seconds.
And actually, that's a long gunfight. Relative, right? 13 seconds is really long. Right. And I've heard you say in other interviews that you thought it was, could have been 13 minutes.
Right. I had no idea it was that quick.
Just boom, 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 boom. Now, did you have an adrenaline dump?
I don't know if I did. And I was a 22-year veteran at the time that shooting happened.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a rookie. And I don't say this.
Was that but if you've never been in a gunfight before, had you?
No, I'd been present during some gunfights. I'd never been part of one.
Right.
Yeah. I'd seen several people killed by officers, but I'd never been the one that actually did it.
Right.
But about 2 days later, I was ordered by the chief to go see the police psychiatrist, and that's standard procedure for anybody. And I remember going.
I probably would like that, honestly.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. And after we were done, she said, "You're good to go." She said, because I just told her, I said, I don't have any regrets other than the fact I wish he wouldn't have pulled his gun out. But we did what we were trained to do.
We did what we were trained to do.
We neutralized the threat. We're all okay, and I'm very comfortable with what we did.
And I went home that night.
You're right, yeah. And the other officer did too, more importantly. So yeah. I was cleared pretty quickly after that. But still, ordered not to be on the street for 6 weeks prior to the grand jury. There was always a grand jury called.
Right.
And so that was a rough 6 weeks. But other than once I hit the street, I was fine.
Why was there a rough 6 weeks? Simply because you liked working and you could.
I was a street guy. I was a street dog my whole career. I never took a lieutenant's test. I always wanted to be out there where the action was. And I mean that. I don't mean that to sound like Rambo or anything like that, but I wanted to be on the street.
Well, you were a cowboy. You weren't the AK.
Right. So there we go. Now I know.
Right.
Now I know what it means. I know a lot of fine command officers. I just didn't want to be one of the upper
ones. So ultimately, circling back to this Miranda situation, were you okay with that?
No. So the next day, a detective that I didn't really know, a homicide detective, I came in and sat down. I had my union attorney with me, and we just went over step by step as to what happened. And he was very professional, and I knew, and I told my wife that night, I said, we'll be fine on this one, because the guy started firing shots at us. We'll be good. And so the interview went fine. I don't hold any animosity at all towards anybody in this whole, how it all worked out. I just realized that's just kind of how it is. You
mentioned that the suspect's daughter had contact with you years after this.
Yeah, so probably about, probably 5 years after the shooting, 5 or 6 years, I get a call, and it's a soft voice from a female on the phone, identifies herself as the daughter of the suspect that we shot killed. She said she wanted to meet myself and the other officer as a form of closure, just to kind of talk to us and everything. And I thought about it for a long time as to whether or not I was going to do it. And I called the other officer, and he was pretty definite that he wanted to do it. So I said, okay. So we did meet.
And there's nothing in policy that prohibits from doing it.
I was off the job. Oh. Yeah. So we met, and she was a very spiritual person, and held our hand at the table and prayed. And people are looking at us like, what the heck's going on at that table over there? She was very spiritual. And she basically asked me the question that haunted her for 5 years is, could you have done anything else besides what you did? And I told her, I said, no. I said, sorry. I said, but your father, who had bragged to the informants in that case that he would not go to prison alive. We had heard that a lot over the years from individuals, and they would crumble as soon as we ran up on them most of the time. This guy actually lived long enough to take out that threat on us, and then we had to neutralize it. He did not want to go back to prison alive.
Yeah, he ended it the way he wanted to end it.
Right.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, a half a block from his house, too, by the way.
Yeah. Wow. That's ridiculous.
Which added to the stress at the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. Because not family members are just. Ugh. So I'm fascinated that criminals come up to you, or folks that you've arrested come up to you in public, and they'll see you, and afterwards, that's a regular thing for you.
That is a regular thing. Well, when I was in the drug squad, my crew was pretty well known as being aggressive, and the drug dealers pretty much knew us by name, knew me by name. Several of the other people, the main drug dealers in Omaha. And it's nothing now for, and my wife would verify this if she was here. We'll be at a restaurant or sitting in a bar or something, and somebody will come up and they'll say, do you remember me? Which kind of worries me a little bit sometimes when I get asked that question. And most of the time I don't know who they are. And they'll say, well, man, you arrested me like back in 1998, and I did 12 years of federal prison time, but I'm doing great now, and thanks for saving my life. I really appreciate it. And I've only had one semi-bad experience out of hundreds that have come up to me, and that wasn't even that bad, to be honest with you.
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you take protective measures? I would.
Yeah, that's one, and I appreciate the opportunity not to answer that. So I
don't have to. Move on.
I keep that as you can figure it out.
Yeah, I already have. Okay. I once had a question like this. I was a criminal justice major in college, and I can't remember what class it was. It's almost a silly question, but what's the ultimate, I think the question is something that went along like this. What's the ultimate thing that puts you in a position to avoid being a criminal? What do you need in your life to avoid being a criminal?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you my answer as soon as you go.
Yeah, I think it's solid family structure with rules, regulations in the house, parents who give a crap about who you're associating with, what you're doing, money coming into the household, so mom and dad hopefully bringing money in that they don't get involved in crime, so they're bringing money in, they're able to provide for you, and then based on the structure that they're giving you, you're going out and hanging out with the right kids, the right people. In school, there's mostly the good crowd, and then there's the bad crowd. And the kids that gravitate towards the bad crowd are the ones that I dealt with later on in life.
The odds are stacked against them.
A solid family structure with two parents And not just necessarily two parents, even one parent who just gives a crap about you really is a huge advantage for these kids. Now, having said that, the vast majority of people that I've arrested came from dysfunctional households, got into the bad crowd.
Unfortunately, it's very cyclical. Yeah. It's very cyclical.
Started smoking cigarettes at a young age and then gravitated to smoking marijuana at a young age. Got into that crowd. Then they got involved in dabbling, maybe selling a little marijuana here and there. And then maybe they're selling some ecstasy in high school or LSD. Then they're introduced to meth and they're starting to use meth. And then they might sell a little bit of meth. Then they meet that one guy who can get them an ounce or two of meth and they get involved with him. And then they find out they can get a pound from a guy. And then they're selling pounds. And then at the age of 21, we bust them. And all of a sudden we can pin 30 pounds of methamphetamine on them over the past year. And that's a story that I wrote in book number 1 of a group of high school kids that got involved in that exact scenario. And they all did federal prison time.
Yeah. And that's essentially what I answered is the structure of family and school. I think is important. I think it's important people are involved in activities. And then I'm also a religious guy. Well, I don't know if religious, but I do believe that the church plays a role also. It's just another structure that is regulated perhaps, or there are certain consequences to actions and so forth. And I just think, I think that's a great answer.
Well, I've arrested, generations of families during my 26 years.
It's very cyclical. Yes. Yeah.
So
I won't repeat some of the jokes that we used to say about that, but it's true. It's cyclical.
I don't ever agree when people say, though, that kid never stood a chance. Never stood a chance. Because I've seen plenty of kids came from households like that were successful and stayed away from that crowd. I'm just saying your chances are increased drastically if you live in a household like that.
Right. I was involved with the Teammates program for 15 years, and I think that's a tremendous program.
My wife was just with her teammate today.
Bless her. It's because what I discovered is that it wasn't necessarily what we were even talking about. As a matter of fact, I mentored this kid for years, and I never gave him advice or anything. But you know what was important is that it was the only thing that this kid had that was consistent. He lived in probably 6 different homes when I mentored him for 8 years. Think about that for a second. But I was the only thing that was there every Tuesday. I can't remember what day we met. Every Thursday at lunch, he knew that I was going to be, if I was out of town, I'd tell him in advance, and he knew that. But it was steady. It's just something as small as that can make a tremendous difference in these kids' lives.
Difference. I commend you for doing it too, because you probably I think it's really helped that kid.
It's a tremendous program, and I tell you what, folks, I got a lot more of it than he did. I guarantee you.
I hear that a lot.
It's a great program. Yes. So, were you too young to be a cop at age 18?
Oh, I probably was, but I was. So that's a weird story how that worked out. At the time, for some reason, Omaha Police were hiring 19-year-olds, and I'm not quite sure. That's way too young to be a cop. But they were hiring 19-year-olds, and I was 18, and I heard that they were testing coming up. That's all I ever wanted to do. My dad was a federal U.S. Marshal.
Now, that is cool. That is cool.
That is 39 years.
I always wanted to go to the United States Secret Service, and I think the Marshals was probably my second
39 years he was in the U.S. Marshals.
That's a pretty cool job.
He was the chief deputy and for most of those years. So I was always in that law enforcement realm. And as a kid, I always had a scanner in my room. So by the age of 12 or 13, I knew all the codes, and I knew the A, Adam, B, boy, C, Charles, phonetic alphabet. And that's all I ever wanted to do. And I really tried to stay away from bad things in high school. Believe me, I could have associated with some bad kids in high school because they were my buddies. But I stayed away from that.
This is the one thing that always got me.
Yeah. And I really tried. I'm not perfect, but I really tried to stay away from that stuff. And I started taking the test in the summer of 1978. And I just kept advancing and advancing and advancing. And I'm thinking they're not going to hire me because I wasn't going to be 19 until August.
Did you get good grades in school?
Yeah, I did, yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm called in for a psych eval. Then I'm called in for a deputy chief interview. And I'm thinking, and I haven't told my parents I'm doing this at all. I was kind of doing this on the side. And I get a letter one day, and I'm out of 1,300 applicants. They whittled it down to 130, and I was number 2. In the letter, I was number 2. And I thought, oh my gosh.
Now, so how many did you start with?
There were probably 1,300 applicants, I think, yeah. And I ended up number 2.
Yeah.
So,
how many were in your class?
27.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
7 out of 13 are not bad.
Yeah, right. So I accepted. I told my mom and dad, and they were they were not too happy. But I think they grew to accept the fact that that's what I wanted to do, and I had to mature very quickly. And I will say, I was pretty mature for an 18-year-old. And I turned 19 in the police academy, but I had to mature really quickly on the streets because they would have eaten me up alive if I would have gone out there thinking like a 19-year-old. I had to really, because I started seeing murder victims, sexual assault victims, child abuse victims, arresting people for committing these crimes.
You had to have been extremely mature. To me, being a cop it's not, you don't have to be Einstein to be a cop. You have to have common sense and rational thought, and you've got to be able to take emotion a little bit out of you can't get emotional when you're doing your job.
Right.
And so for me to believe that you were all those things at a young age, 18, 19, 20 years old, that's remarkable.
I had some good mentors, though. I write about them in the book, and I had some good mentors that took me under their wing and everything.
How was your FTO experience? Was that lots of fun?
Yeah,
pretty rough on you?
I think I had a few that didn't think I belonged there, to be honest with you. I think they when they probably heard they had the 19-year-old, they're probably like, oh gosh,
They bring them through. How many FTOs did you have?
3. I was assigned 3, 1 on each shift.
Gotcha.
And all 3 became my friends later on down the line. But I did pretty well on FTO training. And then I got assigned right out of FTO training to a one-man car in Northeast Precinct.
Did you have confidence as a young guy in FTO? Were you pretty confident? You must have been.
I don't know.
I was 30-some years old when I went through FTO. I wasn't, a grown man has an established business, successful business. And my biggest knock on me as a new officer was that I wasn't aggressive enough, that I was too cautious.
Yeah, I had a great sergeant. I had a great sergeant.
You were opposite. You're probably a paper guy. I always call the young guys the tigers because they're ready.
I got toned down a little bit by my sergeant a couple times, Sergeant Glenn Berry, who just passed here a couple years ago at like 88 or something. He was great sergeant, but he commanded like a Marine sergeant. He would bark out orders, and if he was mad at you, he'd rip into you.
Yeah.
And I was scared to death of this guy. But I got to be dear friends with him down the line. And he always told me, he'd go, Mark, all the troops care about when the shit's hitting the fan.
So
somebody comes in and makes a decision.
Yeah.
And that they trust you. You may find out later it was the wrong decision, but just come in, start telling people what to do, get the troops out of there as quick as you can, get the situation taken care of, and get out.
Yeah.
And that's very good advice.
I was taught a lot of that too. It was just basically you'll know you're done well when these guys trust you, and you'll know when they trust you.
Right.
And I'd like to say I think most everybody in my department trusted me.
Right.
At least they taught me a lot.
Right. I
think they
like
found me interesting.
I like to think the same, yeah. I hope they did.
Is police work, it's been described as 59 minutes of sheer boredom and 1 minute of sheer terror. Do you think that's accurate?
Well,
what you did,
yeah,
probably a little bit more minutes of terror there.
Yeah, but so we did a lot of long surveillances, and we did a lot of wiretaps, and wiretaps sound exciting, but they're not. You're sitting there.
No.
Either listening to phone calls all day long, or on surveillance, and it's tough.
I interned when I was in college. I interned with Nebraska State Patrol Narcotics Unit down in Lincoln, and so maybe I know Bob Thorson. You know Bob?
Oh, sure, I know.
Okay, so Bob was the head of the unit, and Tom Nesbitt, guy who went on to be colonel of patrol, was in that, and then another dear friend of mine, Dave DeShong, was an investigator there, and his son's now a trooper. And anyway, I did a lot of that. And I was the one entering all this stuff as an intern. But it is boring. It absolutely is boring.
Right. But it's still fun, though.
It was interesting because you're putting together puzzle pieces.
I never felt like I had a job in the 26 years I was with the Omaha Police. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
You enjoyed getting up every morning and going to work?
No, I enjoyed sleeping in every morning and getting up and going to work.
Every night.
That's what I enjoyed.
How long were you a uniform officer?
5 years.
5 years. And did you get tired of driving around in circles after?
Uniform patrol, I still think it was the best 5 years of my career. I loved it. I kind of almost wish I would have stayed a little more in uniform, but once I got in the drug squad, I found my niche, and I was there actually the last 18 years of my career.
It's almost, I think, unusual to be with a drug unit that long, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think we did a good job, and I've never had any scandals or anything like that. And I really tried to lead by example with the troops. It was tough being on Langan's crew in a way. It was tough to get on the crew because I was tough. I had to remind the guys, we're not hotshot narcotics officers. We're Omaha police officers. Don't forget that.
How many, maybe you can't say, Well, let's see. In 2004, when you retired, how many officers were on the narcotics?
Probably 12, 13, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about humor as a coping mechanism in policing, because I don't think cops have the strangest and most bizarre, sarcastic, sardonic humor you've ever had. And I think I had that coming in, so I fit in well. But did you use humor as a coping mechanism?
Oh, yeah. And, most of the stories I'm probably not going to tell, but we saw a lot of crazy stuff, saw a lot of funny stuff. And you just can't, the things you find in people's houses on search warrants is just beyond.
Unbelievable.
You
can't even make it up. So crazy you couldn't even have to happen for you to even talk about it because you can't even make it.
I don't even know how to use half these things that I would find, it's just bizarre. But I have a lot of funny stories. When I was in uniform patrol early on, I probably had a little John Wayne syndrome. I was 19 years old and wearing a uniform.
Young tiger.
Sunglasses on and driving a police car. So I get a call of a child struck by a car at 45th and Bedford, and I rolled up license sirens, and he's okay. He's actually okay. He's in the middle of the street with like a broken leg, but he's going to be all right. And my job is to find witnesses to the accident. So I saw a van parked facing a stop sign full of people facing eastbound at 45th and Bedford. And I walked up to the van. I put in the book. I put on my mirror sunglasses, cinched my gun belt up, pulled my cap down, walked over, and I said, "I'm Officer Langan with the Omaha Police. Did anybody in this van see what happened?" And the driver looked at me like I was an idiot, and he pointed outside, and outside of the van said, "Nebraska School for the Blind." I just said, "Sorry about that." I said, "Did you see anything?" He goes, "Nope." I said, "Thank you."
You're not very observant, officer.
Stuff like that.
That's great.
You can't make up. And that brings us back down to earth and makes us realize we're just like everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple more questions here. I know you're limited in time, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. Tell me about the evolution of drug dealing from when you first started on the narcotics in the 80s to the early 2000s.
Yeah, boy, I saw a lot of stuff. When I first got on the police department, the methamphetamine trade was controlled by the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club in eastern Nebraska, western Iowa. And the Omaha chapter is the second oldest.
So what year were you, did you get into narcotics?
88. But I'm talking when I first came on the job.
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
I hadn't heard the word methamphetamine until the 80s.
Right. But it was around, believe me. And the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, based right here in Omaha, the second oldest chapter in the entire country. Oakland, California is the first. Omaha's the second. Powerful chapter in the country. And people were scared to talk on them, scared to inform on them. So they kind of controlled it. And then I got into narcotics in 88 and did some investigations on the Hells Angels. I was never the lead. Douglas County Sheriffs did a great investigation on the Hells Angels that we helped out on and took down a lot of those members. And there was another one in the 90s where we really dismantled that Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Now, they're still around, but they're nothing like they used to be. But all of a sudden, in the mid-90s, they could not compete with the large amounts of methamphetamine coming up from the country of Mexico and the Mexican cartels. Realized that there was a bountiful amount of users across the country. But I-80, it was a pipeline, I-35 coming up south and everything. So we started seeing amounts of methamphetamine increase 100-fold than we had before. Based on the Mexican cartels, coupled with the fact that in the late 80s or early 90s, California gang members that were selling crack cocaine realized that they could come into cities like Omaha, Kansas City, Denver, Des Moines, Minneapolis, and double or triple their profits. So we had huge amounts of meth coming out from Mexico, huge amounts of crack cocaine coming in from California, and that number that I told you of narcotics officers increased significantly because of just the sheer volume of workload and investigations that we had.
Yeah. So did you, there's marijuana and there's cocaine and there's meth, heroin, PCP is different. You saw all of that stuff?
Yeah, we did. I don't want to leave out cocaine because we certainly had our share of cocaine investigations.
That was du jour, right?
And marijuana I didn't even mention because of the fact that, I don't want anybody to go out and sell marijuana. But I've always said if I was going to be a drug dealer, I'd sell marijuana because the penalties are so much lower than selling methamphetamine or selling cocaine. You can basically make the same amount of money. And the danger is probably not as great selling marijuana as it is working with the Mexican cartels and the California gang members. That's not a suggestion to go out and sell marijuana. And we did a lot of cocaine investigations, but the difference between those drugs and methamphetamine and crack cocaine is there are recreational marijuana users. There are recreational cocaine users that can party on the weekends, use a few lines of cocaine, function during the week over a period of time that's going to drag them down, but they can do it. There is not a recreational methamphetamine user or a recreational crack cocaine user. They don't exist.
No. It's so addictive.
Yes.
It's so addictive.
And now we have methamphetamine laced with fentanyl.
Oh, it's scary out there. I don't want
prescription pills laced with
I didn't want to touch anything.
And carfentanil now is a new form of fentanyl, which is even more potent than fentanyl, which is like 100 times more potent than methamphetamine. So I'm glad my kids are grown and not involved in this kind of stuff, because I would be very scared of having my kids go to parties right now.
I mean, when you can get Narcan out of a dispensary machine,
right?
It's pretty.
Right, pretty bad, and that fentanyl is nothing to mess with.
It'll kill you.
I know several families that have lost young people based on accidental fentanyl overdoses. Yes. These are not intentional suicides.
No,
they're thinking they're dropping a hydrocodone or an oxycodone, and these are laced with fentanyl, and they don't know it. It doesn't take much.
It doesn't take much. Adamantly opposed to marijuana being legalized in any form. A lot of cops that I know don't feel the same way as I do. Where are you at on that?
I agree with you 100%. I consider it a gateway drug to bigger and badder drugs. I would interview a lot of the people that I arrested for selling meth and selling coke, and I'd ask them how you started. And I said it earlier. They start out smoking cigarettes at a young age, then always marijuana, and then they get in with that bad crowd with the marijuana, and then they start taking the next step and the next step and the next step. There is something to that. Your marijuana proponents will laugh and scoff when I say this, when I talk to groups of people. I can always hear a few giggles and a few scoffs of people in the crowd.
Well, that's probably because I bet you 60% of we're sitting here in suburban Omaha, and I bet you 50-60% of my neighbors smoke dope.
Yeah. Well, you're
probably
right.
I mean, eyes wide open here.
It's amazing to drive up to a red light during the summertime when you have windows down and get hit and catch that whiff of marijuana coming in the car. But will it ever be legalized in Nebraska? Probably. Will it be in my lifetime? I don't know for sure, but the first step is always legalizing medical marijuana. That's the first step. They come in the back door legalizing medical marijuana. And then once they get that done, they wait a few years, and then they start slipping these bills in the legislature a little bit. And before you know it, marijuana is legal.
100%. And here's somebody that spent years and years and years dealing with this stuff. And I just think, I'm going to have one question. One thing I didn't talk about in your career is that you work for the Humane Society.
I did.
And I'm fascinated by people who hoard pets, for a better way of putting it. And there's no worse situation to go into
than
a
situation.
Home. Yes. Home. I used to carry Vicks in my bag.
Yeah.
For maybe that situation, as well as if you go, somebody's been there for a while and they passed away. But what is that all about? I mean, it's not uncommon for someone to have 30, 40 pets. I mean, dogs and cats and mice and I don't know what else they have.
So after I retired from OPD, I left immediately. I became vice president of field operations at the Nebraska Humane Society. And it was a great retirement job. I was there 15 years, in fact. So I told my wife I'd stay 4 or 5. I stayed 15. And one of the things we did deal with, like you talked about, was animal hoarding cases. And I learned early on with these people that had 100 cats in the house or 50 dogs or whatever, that this was a mental illness situation.
They're just flat lonely, huh?
And well, I mean, they're
or crazy.
Very
not
few
crazy. That's not suffering from mental illness.
Yeah, very few have any family support. They live by themselves, and this is their sense of well-being is taking in these feral cats and starting to feed them, and then it gets cold and they feel bad about them being outside, so they bring them in. Well, then there's inbreeding going on and stuff like that. And before they know it, they have 100 cats in the house, and the odor is overwhelming. The high ammonia level is overwhelming. We used to have to call. We'd have to call Omaha Fire Department out. They'd ventilate the house out for us, and everything, because we couldn't go in there. But I learned early on, we started joining mental health task forces. We started working with Lutheran Family Services with counselors down there that could come to the house. I could call Lutheran Family to bring a counselor right to the house to start working with the person. Great. The Kim Foundation, we got on Animal Hoarding Foundation through the Kim Foundation. So that Humane Society job was a lot more than people realize. It's not just out there catching dogs. That was a very challenging job. That would be another hour probably here on the podcast.
Yeah. Did you run into people that had exotic animals, crocodile?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, we had the guy.
I mean, it's unbelievable that that someone your neighbor might have an alligator. Like what?
Yeah, we've got at least 2 alligators that we seized from people, and they both called us and said it's getting scary. They're getting too big down there. They're starting to come after us.
Humor.
Right? Yeah. So you can't fix stupid. That might be the title of my next book. Is you can't fix.
You can't fix stupid. Yeah. Final question: what were you missing in your life if your law enforcement career didn't happen?
Well, what I would have been missing is just the occasions, hundreds of occasions, to make decisions that affected people's lives right then and there and long term. I would not have had that. And I kind of thrived on that. Police officers make decisions every day that impact people's lives for the rest of their lives. Do we take that kid out of the house and put him in foster care? Do we arrest that individual, or in some situations, do I refer him to drug court? I call the prosecutor and suggest they go to drug court, which I did a lot of times. Just every single day, we are impacting people's lives. And I don't know of any other job that I could have had where I would have had, and I don't say power because it wasn't power, but where I had that ability to make those decisions on a daily basis. And I didn't always make the right ones, but I at least made decisions. But overall, I really learned how to, I think, help a lot of people. Cops just don't want to take people and put them in prison. We want to try to help people as best we can. And I'd like to think I did that too. Yeah.
Well, no doubt about it. When you have folks that you put away for 10 years and they came up and thank you.
Go figure.
No doubt that you did your job.
Yeah, go figure.
Mark, thank you very much.
It's been great.
Really appreciate it.
Sam, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.